Titanic set off from Southampton for Cherbourg on April 10, 1912, with roughly 1,300 passengers, including the Titanic's designer, Thomas Andrews, and White Star Line President J. Bruce Ismay. Edward John Smith, a veteran White Star ship's captain, may have considered making this maiden voyage as his last before retiring. He joined a nearly 900-person crew that ushered passengers onto their respective decks. The luxury was evident immediately, at least to first and second class passengers. A first-class lounge was even patterned after the palace at Versailles. But the real architectural flourish of the ship was a 5-story wooden staircase.
To my mind, the grand staircase of Titanic was by far her most compelling and attractive architectural feature. I've never seen anything quite like it before or since in any other ship. It just looks perfect to me. The dome overhead is just perfect. Not too much, not too little.
Still, it wasn't unique. Other ships had multi-deck staircases. Though the Titanic's elegance was undeniable, it was also old-fashioned. Harland and Wolff's carpenters built the same style furniture, laid the same patterned carpeting, and installed the same stained glass windows as they had in previous ships. Stylistically, they tried little that was new.
They were somewhat pedestrian, oddly enough. I've never understood why they didn't try. They had the opportunity with Olympic and Titanic to do something very different. And they went for the very same patterns, the very same fabrics, the very same carvings in some of the public rooms that could be seen in some of their earlier ships.
If the Titanic wasn't exactly stylistically up to date, it was safety conscious. In addition to the double bottom and the watertight bulkheads, watertight doors in those bulkheads could be locked and sealed electrically from the bridge. Although the original plans called for 64 lifeboats, the final tally of 20 exceeded the legal limit for British-flagged ships of her size.
It's amazing how people talk about lifeboats. There weren't enough on the Titanic and this type of thing. But one must remember all steamship companies of the time had similar faults. Lifeboat accommodation was based on tonnage, not the number of people you carried. And in fact, the Titanic had more lifeboats than what the requirement called for. She had 14 wooden boats, she had 2 emergency cutters, and she had 4 collapsible boats.
With room for 1,200 passengers in the lifeboats, mariners considered this more than sufficient for a ship with a capacity of over 3,000. Lifeboats were meant only to ferry passengers from a damaged or disabled ship, not to sustain every passenger on board indefinitely on the open seas. And why should Harland and Wolff worry now that science had provided the wireless for ships to communicate at sea? This was arguably the single greatest technological achievement on the Titanic, and possibly its most significant safety device. And it was unlike that on any other ship.
She was the only one afloat that carried a Marconi rotary disc. Titanic had 16 studs around the periphery of her disc. This thing spun at a high rate of speed, and every time the electrodes lined up, the spark jumped between them. This caused more hits and gave Titanic's spark a very musical tone.
The spark discharged across the electrodes 120 times per second, which resulted in a clear, high-density tone. When the operator pressed the key, a circuit was completed, allowing current to flow through the transmitter. Opening and closing the circuit created the Morse code characters comprising each message.
And it was the tone itself that carried farther, not the brute power of the spark, but the actual tone.
The Titanic's Marconi wireless had a range of 250 to 400 miles during the day, and even farther at night.
They were testing the wireless in Belfast, and the wireless operators actually picked up Cairo. So that was quite a distance back then.
In the unlikely event that the Titanic was damaged, a signal could be sent to nearby ships to aid in rescue operations. Ships could also warn each other about potential trouble, such as icebergs. But despite this emphasis on safety, trouble plagued the Titanic before it ever left Southampton Harbor. Its massive hull displaced so much water that a nearby ship nearly collided with it. Also, a persistent coal fire buried in a bunker smoldered for several days.
You would have spontaneous combustion in areas of coal bunkers. It happened quite often, and it was not raging flames or anything like that, but they would just continue drawing the coal until the seat of the fire was revealed, and then they would extinguish the embers.
The Titanic made 2 otherwise uneventful stops before heading for America, with just over 2,200 passengers and crew. Wireless messages of congratulations were mixed with warnings of ice in the sea lanes. As these were sent to the bridge, Captain Smith ordered the ship into a more southerly route. A 6-hour wireless breakdown on the ship added to a backlog of messages, including iceberg warnings over the weekend. By Sunday, April 14th, with the wireless finally repaired and the coal fire out, the ship was traveling at nearly full power, 22 knots. It was a moonless night, and the seas were remarkably calm. Calm, dark seas may be good for passengers, but bad for spotting icebergs, since no waves would lap against the ice and no moon would reflect off it. But at approximately 11:40 p.m., a warning rang out from the crow's nest. An iceberg was dead ahead. As the Titanic bore down upon it, no liner ever built was better prepared to withstand such a collision.